Is remote work going to stay? There are a lot of variables that go into this, like politics, how are people going to work, how our cities will look in the future, and most importantly of all, is it going to be profitable for the companies enforcing it? So let's get over those topics. I'm gonna speak from my own experience and talking with different companies about this. I'm also gonna give you feedback and thoughts of people actually deciding if everyone is going to work remotely or not in the future. So when speaking about remote work, of course not everyone can work remotely, but a lot of jobs can be done remotely, and I think in most Western countries it is around 20% or so of workers that can work remotely. So the question is, why hasn't everyone worked remotely before? So when you think about it, it was something that people didn't do very often, or it was something that you would do mostly because you felt sick or but still wanted to work the day. For example, in the area of software development, remote work is a much bigger topic than in the area of accounting, for example. Accountants really didn't work remotely that much. So when you think about it, why hasn't everyone worked remotely before? So a lot of jobs in the software industry were outsourced, and especially outsourced to Southeast Asian countries, where the workforce is a bit cheaper and it just makes logical sense to those companies. But not everything can be done remotely. Some things just aren't that efficient. For example, 10 people talking about growth strategies and future features to be implemented in a boardroom most probably is going to be more efficient than people working over Teams and trying to fix audio issues. Then you again have the problem that it is a risk. Like, it is a risk for companies to do it. Right now not, because they had to do it. But before the pandemic it was a huge risk because everything was working as it was and never changed running code, right? So when everything was already working the way it was, why should we change it? And now that everyone had to change it, the landscape is different because the money and time is already invested into this, and there is no logical sense to go back now. On the other hand, the efficiency is also extremely important. How efficient are workers that work remotely? And the answer to that is that they are equally as efficient as working in an office, or even more efficient. So that is also going to be a huge reason for remote work to stay in the future. I think personally that remote work is to a certain level even more efficient. So it comes down to the state of a project. If a project is already going and everyone knows what to do, I think it's even more efficient because people can just work mostly a bit longer, and you just think that if someone is online, they are also at work, and people just work longer. Because earlier it was like you just go out of the office and that's it. Only if something really important comes up, you're gonna be contacted, but otherwise that's it, you're just not available anymore. And right now everyone is available around the clock, so people are working longer, and I think that the efficiency at home is in most cases better. You have your own setup, there is no one to interrupt you, and there is just not so much stuff to do and to talk about than in a crowded office with 20 people in it. So I think that the efficiency wise, it's even better and makes more sense for companies to enforce it to a certain level. So then there is also the politics behind it. And in most European countries, there is also a tax that could come in the future for people working entirely remotely. So politics is definitely going to play a role in it. Why? Because if everyone is just at home and cooking at home, there is a lot of consumer spending that falls apart. It's just not going to be there anymore. So for example, people going to food courts, people going for drinks, using their cars more often, using public transport, doing stuff when they're outside, and those things are not there anymore, or they are much less there. So politics is going to step into this, and there are going to be new regulations about this. So for example, here in Europe, some countries have said that they are going to enforce a tax. I'm not sure how much it's going to be or on what base it's going to be calculated, but it could be something like 50 to 100 euros per month that you need to pay extra just for the reason that you're not going out, so you're not spending that money. So that's also something that needs to be considered. And if the government is talking about such things, you can also think that it's really probable that remote work is going to stay there, at least for a certain level. So from my experience, since I'm a freelancer and I'm in contact with a lot of companies, I have the feeling that remote work will stay there for at least 3 days a week. So most people will work at least 3 days a week remotely, and those were mostly companies in the banking sector, insurance sector, automotive industry, and so on. So there is really an incentive for people to work remotely for a certain amount of time. There are meetings and happenings and topics that need to be discussed in the office and really are more efficient or project critical if discussed in the office, and those things will need to be done on site. But a lot of things can be done remotely, and it has been shown that the efficiency was the same or even better for remote work. The workforce was happy with that, and most people expressed the feeling that they would like to come to the office once or twice a week. So I think it is going to stay like that. It is maybe going to be a bit less than it was in the pandemic, since some jobs don't work really well remotely. But for most software engineering roles, I think it's going to pretty much stay 100% remote. For project management roles or management roles, it's going to be like 50-50 or 60% remote, 40% on site. It's mostly going to stay in that level. So that's what I have heard, and those are the plans that were made, for example, for 2021. So I think it is going to stay there, and there is a push for it to stay the same pretty much as it was during the pandemic, a little bit less maybe, at least in the software industry. So there are of course other benefits to that. You have to think that the company is having it cheaper, they have lower costs. But on the other hand, those companies didn't ditch their offices, they still have those offices, so they're still paying for it to be empty. So, and a lot of companies are thinking about reducing their offices or ditching parts of it. And if they do that, a certain part of the workforce is definitely going to stay remote. So when you think about it, the people cost around 50%, are a 15% cost for the company, especially in the software development area, and offices make around 10% plus minus 5%. So it's not going to be that much of a cost savings for the companies, but it is still there, and it is still a reason, considering that the efficiency is the same, for companies to keep people working remotely. Then there is another problem. If the work can be done remotely, what is hindering the company to just outsource those jobs? Those jobs could be just outsourced to, for example, Southeast Asia, where the workforce is cheaper. So as I have mentioned, you still need to come into the office a few times. There are still things that need to be discussed in the office, and there are still legal things that prohibit, for example, this. So if there is a project that's being done for the government in most cases has certain types of regulations for that. So they have a regulation that the work maybe has to be done within the country, that data sharing internationally won't work, or stuff like that. So there is also this legal reason for that. And on the other hand, some jobs may get outsourced, but those are mostly some manual tasks or tasks that can be automated. But anything that is more important for the project or mission success is going to stay pretty much the same way, just that the workforce is going to work more remotely. Then there is also the question of, are people going to get paid less if they work remotely? So on one hand, there is this argument, you're working remotely, you don't have to come to the office, we can pay you less. But on the other hand, there is also the argument that since we don't need to spend for offices, we can pay you even more since we're saving on that. So from my own experience, I was offered a few projects working remotely and working on site, and it mostly was in the direction that working remotely was paid a little bit less, but not really significant. It was mostly around 5%, even less than 5% less. And I'm not sure if this is going to stay that way, but those were some offers that I received and some experience that I have went through. So I think that it is mostly going to stay the same as it was. So those are the main points that are going to influence working remotely, and I think personally that it is going to stay a bit less than during the pandemic, but it is mostly going to stay there. And there are of course a lot of other topics, political discussions, economic discussions that are going to come, and stuff that is going to change, for example cities being less populated, and so on and so forth. So I hope this video was useful and entertaining to you. If you have some questions or have your own opinions and thoughts, leave them down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next video.